My name is Kathy Shepard, and I am the president of the Atlanta Jung Society. Welcome to our first online seminar in our series during the time of the coronavirus. Our next lecture will be Saturday, May 16th, and it will be Jim Hollis. All that information will be on our website, and you will be able to register there also. Also, tonight's lecture will be recorded, and that will be on our website if you'd like to listen again. And also, we've been so fortunate to receive a challenge grant of $5,000 this year. So if anybody is able to donate, we would be so grateful. All of that information will be on our website, jungatlanta.com. Don Huntley will be managing our program tonight, and we're so grateful to him for doing this. Don, I'm going to let you orient us to how the program will run tonight.
Okay, just a minute here.
Okay.
Okay, so right now everybody's mic is muted except for Kathy, me, and Rebecca. You will not be able to unmute at all while the lecture is taking place. You can communicate to Rebecca or me via chat. Only Rebecca and I will be able to view chat. So if you're chatting, it's just me or Rebecca. When the lecture is complete, you will selectively be given the chance to unmute your mic. We've got a lot of people in this meeting, a lot more than we ever expected. So it'll be really critical to mute your mic back when you're through speaking. When the lecture is complete, Rebecca will give you instructions on how we're going to do Q&A. So this is a learning experience for all of us, so bear with us if there are any technical glitches. This is the first time I've really done a big meeting, and this is a lot of people to start with. So I hope it all goes well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill. And Bill, give me just a minute to unmute you. Okay, Bill, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, guys. You might recognize me as a humble bookseller in the back of the room normally, but now with no books to sell. I'm going to introduce our guest tonight. Rebecca Armstrong is a professional storyteller, mythologist, minister, and teacher. Her family was close friends with Joseph Campbell during the last 15 years of his life. She has served as the International Outreach Director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation, visiting dozens of countries and helping to establish mythological study groups that explore the repercussions of Campbell's work in their own lives. She represented the Joseph Campbell Foundation at 3 of the parliaments of world religions and wrote the monthly myth letter for the international online membership. She holds 3 graduate degrees and teaches courses in myth, religion, ethics, and philosophy at Indiana University and DePaul University. Now, she knew I liked books, so she gave me a nice little anecdote about Joseph Campbell. When Campbell was asked in a religious setting what his spiritual practice was, he replied, underlining sentences. During one of her visits to the Joseph Campbell Foundation, Rebecca was shown some of the Joseph Campbell's file boxes. These contained folders with outlines Joe had made for the books he'd read. Each folder had a long 10-page outline, a condensed 3-page outline, and a highly distilled 1-page outline. Here were the results of Campbell's spiritual practice of underlining, a testament to his appreciation of each author's ideas and his extraordinary synthesizing of them. This was Campbell's genius. Rebecca admits that she's not so methodical, but she has taken up the spiritual practice of underlining sentences and writing in margins. When her son asked, "Mom, how can you read so many books?" she replied spontaneously, "I'm not reading, I'm having conversations." She believes that right now, when we are distanced from our living, breathing neighbors, let's realize that we probably have shelves full of potential best friends and sparring partners waiting for us to converse with them. Need a friend? Pick up a book. So now let's welcome Rebecca Armstrong.
Oh, Bill, thank you so much. It's delightful to hear that little bit of typing on the email actually coming out of your mouth. It adds so much life. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah and Don Huntley and Kathy Shepard, for this generous offer to let me be the guinea pig on the first Jung Atlanta online vehicle. I'm very excited to be here. So tonight, I need to say that I'm so used to being with people in real time and having the ability to see your faces and get that direct and immediate feedback is what a storyteller craves. And speaking into this little black, unseeing eye of a camera is very disorienting. But I want to try to make it feel as if we are somehow in the same space, the same soulful psychic room, sharing the stories of the ancestors, sharing the words of the great poets, and somehow even sharing our feelings tonight, our feelings of anxiety and stress and fear and maybe even grief about what is happening to us. I was going to give a talk on bliss, what Joseph Campbell meant. But when we realized I would not be allowed to fly to Atlanta to be with you in person, I decided I needed to change the nature and the title of the talk. It's still going to be a talk about bliss, but about bliss in a time of Corona, which now has a very, very different mood, a different overtone. So I want to begin by saying, dear unseen friends, I hope that you can feel my presence with you in this space tonight, and that my voice will come through as someone who is also on the journey with you. So, to begin in a very lighthearted way, I want to confess, and those of you who have already met me will know that this is not my usual hairdo. I have long, very straight hair. But because much of this talk was inspired by reading The Red Book by Carl Jung, where he implores us to remember the dead, I decided to take a piece of wisdom from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who grew up raising 5 children during the Depression, and going to the hairdressers was just not an option, as it is not an option for us right now. And so the grandmother's wisdom is that you can run sugar water through your hair and then braid it in lots of little tiny braids and sleep in it overnight. And the next day you take the braids out and voila, you have all these lovely little curls. So in this very humble way, I am trying to begin this practice of honoring the ancestors in ways large and small. And this whole talk, in fact, is a praise poem in honor of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, both of whom were giants, and one of whom I had the enormous privilege to actually know as Uncle Joe. And his frequent visits to our home in Wilmette, Illinois, were a joy and an education. And one of the many stories that I could tell about Joe's visits to our home outside of Chicago, this one resonates and feels most important to share tonight. Back in the 1970s, Joseph Campbell had very recently retired from being a full-time teacher at Sarah Lawrence College. And he began going around the country making lectures. And whenever he came to Chicago to give a lecture, he would stay with us. So this is a story of something that happened during one of his lectures at Loyola University. Campbell loved to lecture with slides. And so there was always an old-fashioned slide projector, and he'd carry one end of a clicker so he could move the slides forward one at a time in those great big round plastic tubs where you inserted the slides one by one, very different from our contemporary PowerPoints. But this one evening, we were all at Loyola University for his talk, and the university had set up a short stage, one of those, it's probably only 30 inches tall, so it elevates the speaker a little bit above the crowd. And Joe was in the middle of his lecture, and he turned towards the slides behind him, the screen behind him, and took a fateful step back. He was already at the very edge of the stage, and the step back made him lose his balance, and he began to fall off the stage. Now, remember that at this time, Campbell was already in his early 70s, and the idea that this man was going to fall off even a low platform was of great concern, and you could hear this intake of anxious breath from the audience. Without missing a beat, Campbell, on the one foot that was still on the platform while the other foot kind of waved in midair, he pivoted on the one foot, he turned towards the fall, he tucked his head, he put an arm over his head, folded into a beautiful forward somersault, rolled off the platform, finished the somersault, got to his feet, pivoted around, climbed back on the stage, and kept talking. It was a beautiful and dramatic moment. After the lecture, we, of course, asked him what had happened and how he had recovered so gracefully. He said, you know, I was quite an athlete in my youth, and one of the subjects that I really studied and loved was wrestling. The very first thing they teach you in wrestling is how to fall down. And here's the key. You have to move into the fall. Do not resist. Go with the energy of the fall and travel with it. Use the momentum of the fall to keep you safe and guide you again to your feet. Now, I'm sure that you can appreciate where I'm going with this story. This feels like the perfect metaphor for the times we're in. We're falling. But if we can follow Campbell's advice, and instead of resisting, instead of drawing back, if we can turn in the direction of the fall and allow ourselves to move with it, tucking our head humbly before this great thing which has accosted us all, and go with that, go with the momentum, we have a chance of coming out of this still standing. So this is my opening story for all of you. I want to come back to this moment, but let me just very briefly give you an overview of where I hope we'll go tonight, because I think sometimes it helps the listener to understand the chapters that we're going to explore. So what I want to do in the first section is build on this story of the fall and try to mythologically discover the place that we are right now. Then I'm going to really do a deep dive into bliss, what Joseph Campbell meant by bliss, which is not what most Americans understand by the word bliss. And for that piece of the talk, I'm going to move into the PowerPoint slides that I prepared. So you'll see a shift on your screen from my face to the slides. And then I want to come back and do a very important third piece, because whenever something like this event of being able to speak to you, I am always on the lookout for synchronicities, which is what Jung called these co-activating energies that come together in unexpected ways, or what Joseph Campbell called the serendipities of life. Because I had an extraordinary serendipity last week, a week from today. So that would have been Holy Saturday, wouldn't it? And I was gifted a dream from someone who came to me quite unexpectedly. So that third part of the talk will be a dream, and the corresponding Bronze Age fairy tale, which exactly matches the dream of this contemporary American. And I think in that way, I will be able to illustrate some of the ideas that I will have laid forth for your consideration. That will take us an hour and 15 minutes, and then we will break and have another half an hour for your questions or comments or sharing. So that's the structure of our evening, and I do thank you for being with me, dear unseen friend. I can feel your presence there and your listening. Now, what I want to do first okay, that didn't work. Let me try again. Okay, well, I won't share the screen yet. I have to figure out again how this works. Let me try one more time. Desktop share. There it is. What I wanted to say is that I'm going to be referencing a lot of books. I'm going to be sharing a lot of poems and stories. And I wanted you to know that I have already created a document that has all of these references already in it, so that you don't have to feel like you have to start, scribbling down lines of words because something suddenly struck you as important. You can visit my website or send me an email, and I will simply send you that PDF so that you have all of the references and poems at your fingertips. So that way you can stay more connected. Yes, Don.
Just a reminder that this is being recorded, and you'll be able to get a recording of this later on.
Indeed. Right. But some people, if they've found a favorite poet that I've been sharing, they might actually want to go and find more of that same poet's work. So, because I'm not going to be doing footnotes during my talk. So I want you to know that all of those notes have been connected and will be available for you. All right. So is my face back on the screen now? I'm just trying to test out, make sure I understand how all of this works. All right. So we want to talk about where we are right now. And I would like to suggest that where we are right now is standing next to the great dark well, a well that represents the collective grief that we are experiencing at this unexpected lockdown of our lives. It's so important for us to be able to identify where we are right now, emotionally and psychically, in order to understand what is being asked of us at this particular time. And I noticed that the levels of people who were in denial or who were angry about what was happening in the outer world suggested to me the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who identified the stages of grief. And that the first stage of grief is denial, that you refuse to acknowledge that something this drastic has happened. The second stage is anger, and then you have bargaining and depression. But I think a lot of us are still in denial. So let me begin by sharing with you a poem by the wonderful Irish poet David White, who speaks to that moment when you stand next to the well of grief. Those who will not break the surface on the well of grief, turning downward through the black waters to the place we cannot breathe, they will never know the source from which we drink, the waters cold and clear, nor find at the bottom glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else. Let me do that for you again. Those who will not slip beneath the surface on the well of grief, turning downward through the black waters to the place we cannot breathe, they will never know the source from which we drink, the waters cold and clear, nor find at the bottom glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else. How many of us are like those who've been throwing the coins into the well, wishing for something else, wishing that this hadn't happened, or it hadn't happened now, or it hadn't happened to us, or it hadn't spread in this way, or it hadn't ruined this plan or that opportunity? That's understandable, it's natural, and now we have to relinquish it. We have to be willing to turn down into the black waters. So this, in fact, the fall into the well, is a very common motif for what is called the call to adventure in the hero myth. When Joseph Campbell talks about that call to adventure, it can come in many forms, but very often it happens as something that looks like an accident. The hero stumbles. The hero catches a glimpse of a white deer in the dark forest. The hero happens to see a feather from a bright bird, and he picks it up. The father, on his way home from work, sees a beautiful flower and plucks it, though it is not his own garden. And from there, the story begins. So let's just admit, we are falling down the well, and it's our call to adventure. The question now is whether we will say yes to the adventure, or whether we will have, in Joseph Campbell's words, those disappointing tales in which the hero refuses the call and nothing is redeemed. This fall, we might ask ourselves, if we are falling, what exactly are we falling into? And I think it's instructive to listen to what Carl Jung used as a description for the word God. This comes from a letter that he wrote in the last couple months of his life to one of his correspondents. He said, "God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or for worse." So according to Jung, this coronavirus is acting in a very strange way like the God that breaks in on the life we had planned and demands something very different from us. Leonardo da Vinci, in one of his notebooks, had come across the opening, a very dark, ominous opening to a deep cave, and wrote in his notebook that the sight of that opening to the dark cave, that black hole against the rock, aroused in him two emotions, fear and desire. Fear of the darkness itself, but desire to know what treasures might be hidden in the darkness. It seems to me that that is exactly the attitude we need to have. We need to channel some Leonardo da Vinci, admit the fear, but embrace the desire to go in, to enter the dark cave. Will you join me? We are falling. The fall is out of this world and into ourselves. Give up the insistence that there is a better place to be or become. Saying yes to the fall liberates you from fear. Dive head first into the dark and dream in a world already alive inside you, where you had forsaken yourself in fascination with the field of forms. Remember, it is through your newly opened heart that the living waters pour out upon the greening land. It is through your newly opened eyes that the 10,000 things stand up and shout their name. Beloved, you are the friend that keeps the dancer dancing. The shadow is the piper that plays the tune, and we must pay the piper. But isn't it for the dance that you came? Now, I want to take you now to the PowerPoint that I prepared that talks about the time of Corona and how it is related to bliss. Okay, why didn't it work? Here we go. We are falling. We accept the fact that we are falling, and we acknowledge that it is the call to adventure. Wanted or unwanted, we are now in the fall. This image that is now on your screen of these 4 circles was something that came across my Facebook post, my Facebook screen, and I do not know the origin of it. I hunted for it and couldn't find where it had come from. But to me, it is very significant. The smallest circle asks the question, who do I want to be during COVID-19? Each of the subsequent circles present an alternative worldview or stance towards reality. The first zone is called fear. The second zone is called learning. The third zone is called growth. You don't have to read all of the inserts right now, but essentially the fear zone is all about dealing with that lizard self that's really just concerned about food and shelter and safety. The learning zone is where you begin to move out of that first space of terror and self-concern and begin to work with a wider sphere. Stop complaining quite so much, look around you, see what else is going on, evaluate things with greater clarity. And finally, the growth zone is an attainment of a very broad level of equanimity towards the situation and an ability to really be a blessing towards others in this time. Now, let me tell you why this particular image attracted me. It wasn't so much for the words. I didn't even read the words till later. What attracted me was the image itself and how closely this image resembled the image I was already working with to explain to all of you what bliss means. Because the sheaths that lead to bliss in the Hindu tradition have very often this same symbolic design that is used to describe them. The word kosha means sheath, and the 5 koshas refer to the idea that each of these 5 bodies that human beings have fits so closely into the next that it is like a knife sliding into a sheath, a sword sliding into its scabbard. The image of the layers of onions fitting so tightly together, or another image that is often used is that of the Russian dolls that stack inside of each other. So here we have the same visual image, and in a very interesting way, the one on the left, the contemporary coronavirus charge or call to adventure, mimics rather precisely the 5 koshas that go back to this ancient Hindu text, the Taittiriya Upanishad, talking about the 5 sheaths of the body. So this similarity struck me at once, that in fact, in a time of coronavirus, we are already dealing with the charge, the challenge to move towards the sheath of bliss. So let's now look closely at what the layers of this sheath are. The first sheath is the Annamaya sheath. Sometimes this is called the gross body. It is, again, what I referred to as the reptile brain. It's the one concerned with hot and cold, food, hunger, sex, survival. So this is the physical, the most tangible part of the human body. The next sheath is called the pranamaya. And this is the one that you can detect the minute you start focusing on your breathing, which is one of the very easy meditations that you are taught, for instance, in a yoga class, the focus on the breath in and out. If you've ever studied meditation, the prana meditation is the first one because it is the energy of the breath moving through the body that introduces you to this second sheath. The third of the 5 koshas is the manomaya. Now, this is the one that we might call the default neural network or the default mode. This is the mind chatter. This is the monkey mind, the mammalian brain that's always keeping up that steady rush of narrative in your mind and directs the emotions, causes you the anxiety you feel because it's concerned about how you're going to appear to others, how you appear to yourself, the needs for self-esteem. All of this is taking place in the subtle body called the manomaya. And you learn how to deal with it by getting in touch with that ongoing chatter in your mind and finding ways to still it, to bring it to a more quiet level, a peaceful level. Setting it aside even temporarily means that you can enter the next layer, the next kosha, which is the Vignamaya, which is moral will. Now, this is an extraordinarily important kosha, and we do not have an exact equivalent for it in the Western scientific tradition yet, although many point to the neocortex and the idea that there is a human instinct towards fairness. That's the closest we've come to it. But in the ancient Hindu tradition, this sheath is of such great importance that these are the practices, I am told, that are taught first to the children. The development of the moral will is the foundation of human capability for moving through all 5 sheaths towards bliss. Now, an equivalent of this in very sort of basic terms, for those of you who've studied psychology, you may remember the famous research study called the marshmallow experiment. This was an experiment, I think it was at Harvard, with a large group of very young children who were put in a room by themselves, and on the plate was a marshmallow. And they were told, if you can resist eating this marshmallow right now, we'll give you a lot more treats when we come back. And then they would go out of the room and leave the child alone. Now, what was interesting, of course, is that some children were able to resist the temptation for immediate gratification and left the marshmallow in hopes of getting more treats later, which they did. Other children could not resist and would eat the marshmallow before the researcher re-entered the space. Now, what's significant is that this study followed those children for decades after this experiment. And what they discovered was an incredible correspondence between those children who could resist immediate gratification, that temptation to eat the marshmallow right away. That group of children had higher grades in grade school, went to college more frequently, went to better colleges, graduated with higher honors, made more money, had more successful marriages, and lived longer. On and on and on. The list of things that corresponded to the strengthening of the moral will were astonishing. So the humble marshmallow experiment has become an important observation in Western world. Of course, the Hindu philosophers could have told you that they had figured that out 5,000 years ago. But it's okay. We all arrive at wisdom when we arrive, and we are now almost there. So if we have worked our way through the 4 sheaths up to this point, we then have the possibility of the breakthrough into Ananda Maya, which is the place of bliss. And here we need to be very clear that what the Hindus understand by bliss is not what the Westerners understand by bliss, nor is it what Joseph Campbell himself meant when he uttered the now famous phrase, "Follow your bliss." In traditional Upanishadic lore, the sheath of bliss is the place where you actually burst through the sheaths of the little self, and you are in the presence of the all. You experience that blinding beauty and brilliance of feeling yourself as one. Tattvam asi, thou art that. You are one with the all. So these layers, these sheaths, the koshas that we have been describing are very much in the Eastern tradition. What Joseph Campbell meant by bliss is something rather different. And we need to understand that. When Joseph Campbell said, "Follow your bliss," he was referring to something that is much more Western in its appeal. And I think I will come out of the screen sharing and speak to you directly. Okay. Am I on screen again? Wonderful. Thanks. Joseph Campbell had this to say. He said, "By bliss, I mean the deep sense of being in it and doing what the push is out of your own existence. It may not be fun, but it's your bliss. And there's bliss behind pain, too." Now, the push out of your own existence, this is the image, and this is what Campbell was trying to describe whenever he talked about follow your bliss. It was finding that thing that is so unique to the Western mythology, which is this idea that inside of each individual, there is a divine spark which already has a destination. Meister Eckhart, the great Catholic mystic, called this the God seed. And he referred to the breakthrough into the recognition of this deep self, the Durchbruch. You are planted with a God seed, and your destiny, your journey is to find out exactly what that is that you are meant to become and to grow into that fullness. Gerard Manley Hopkins has that marvelous poem that begins, "As kingfishers catch fire, as dragonflies draw flame, as tumbled over rim of roundy well stones ring." He goes on, "As each mortal thing does one thing and the same, flings out broad its name, crying, 'What I do is me, for this I came.'" That is the push out of your being. That recognition that there is something unique inside of you yearning to be born, and that it is your sacred task to bring that to the world. This is what Campbell was talking about when he talks about bliss. So we have now this distinction that's very important between the Eastern understanding of bliss and the Campbellian or Western understanding of bliss. But in neither case does bliss equal happiness. In neither case does it equal a pleasant experience. In neither case is it about ego gratification. It is always about some measure of struggle and sacrifice and heroic willingness to enter that dark cave. So let us return now. Oh, I know, I wanted to share some more poems with you that give you a better taste of this bliss from the Western tradition. Because I'm sure that even though I've described it, if you haven't tasted it yourself, if you haven't had one of these peak or mystical experiences, it may still seem very fuzzy, very far away, very amorphous. But I believe that it is through the works of the great artists, the capacity for aesthetic arrest can lead to bliss. Some of the mystic poets or the ecstatic poets like Rumi or Kabir or Hafiz, they will actually take you almost like a magic carpet. You can ride their poetry through those chakra levels and moshas and go straight towards the bliss that they have experienced and have that same breakthrough, that Durchbruch, and feel, at least catch a glimpse of what that means. So here are some poems that I have found can take me to that place, and I hope they will help you as well. The first one is from the great German writer Goethe. He says, "Tell it to a wise one, or else keep silent. For the corporate man will mock it right away. I praise that which is truly alive, that which longs to burn itself out. In the waters of the love nights, where you were begotten, where you have begotten, a strange feeling may come over you as you watch the single candle burning, and a desire for higher love-making awakens. Sweeping you upward, now no longer caught in your obsession with darkness. Distance does not make you falter, arriving as if by magic, flying, mad now for the light. You are the moth and you are gone. And until you have known this, to die and so to grow, you are only a troubled guest on the dark earth." So in this beautiful uprising, the upwelling of the yearning of the moth for the flame, to burn up the ego and experience that oneness, the bliss, the unification, the uniting with the beloved. There are other ways of looking at this. The wonderful poet Kabir, I know I have a Kabir in here that I wanted to share with you, has a similar experience. This is a poem from his, I believe this is a Robert Bly translation. I don't have it. Let me see if I can just remember it. Between the conscious and the unconscious, the mind has set up a swing. All things are swinging. Earth, air, fire, water, the creatures, the supernovas, the little ants by the millions, even the angels, everything is swinging and it never winds down. And inside, the Holy One is slowly growing a body. I saw this for 15 seconds. It has made me a servant for life. So this is the experience of bliss from Kabir. And those 15 seconds moved him with such magnitude that he remained this ecstatic servant of the divine through his poetry and throughout his life. So I hope that in these sharings you have a sense of how brilliant, how worthwhile the journey is to go down into that darkness in search of the sheath of bliss. Now, I do want to go back and share my screen because there's something else very, very interesting that I need to show you. Here were the two images that we looked at earlier. The one on the left, again, is the contemporary one, the one that somebody just created for the time of coronavirus. And it moves from the smallest circle out towards the growth zone at the outside. In the diagram on the right, this is another contemporary rendering of the 5 koshas from the Upanishads. And again, what it shows is the gross body at the smallest point, that little red circle, and then it moves up and out so that you find Anandamaya, the bliss sheath, on the very outside ring. Now, this may seem completely ordinary and normal, except that it is completely backwards. If you recall, when we went through it, and now this image mimics those teaching images from the Hindu tradition. If you move towards bliss, you are moving from the outside towards the inside. It is at the very center of your being that you find your bliss. You do not move out and away from yourself to find bliss. This may seem like a technicality, but I want to assure you that this to me feels absolutely fundamental. This is a metaphoric dimension of terrific importance. We are always moving away from ourselves in our search for something better in the West. What the follow your bliss is trying to suggest, it is that by moving deeper and deeper into yourself, that you find your bliss and not the other way around. So according to the Upanishads, and according to the Western imagination. And why, again, should this be so important? I believe it is because the incorrect rendering of the metaphor shows us that we have pushed our yang energy, our extroverted Western energy to the utmost limits, and that what is now happening to us is this. We are at a point that Jung called the anantamadromia. The anantiadromia means the opposite running. And this is the point at which the yin and the yang have to move, because it is in the nature of energy to constantly move. And if you have pushed one energy to its utmost limits, it must automatically return and form its opposite. If we are at the time of anantiadromia, what do we need to do about it? We need to begin to give up some of that yang energy, where it's always higher, faster, better, more, and instead be willing to understand that the yin energy calls us to be quiet, to be still, to be receptive, to be patient, to wait, to hold, to be quiet, to be dark. And now we must understand where we are in terms of the great epochs of world mythology. From Joseph Campbell's vast reading, we understand that as Homo sapiens, we began in our dim, dark past with the way of the animal powers, where the gods themselves came forth figured as animals, and we projected the mighty powers that we ourselves did not have into the animal gods. And after the way of the animal powers came the way of the seeded earth, the agricultural revolutions of 3,500 years ago, how they came through, and now it was the dying and the resurrecting of the seed that formed the core of the deep mythologies. Christianity rises up in this time period, the way of the hieratic city-states, the dying and resurrecting being the core motif. The next epoch of world mythology is the way of the celestial lights. And here we begin to find the star maps, the idea of the sun king and the moon queen, and the layers of heaven and earth and of society where everyone moves in orbit around the Sun King the way the planets and the stars move. And for a large degree, we are still residing in the way of the celestial lights. Our fascination is with the outer reaches of outer space. We think that going beyond and further will give us the answers. But what Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and other mystics are telling us is that the next mythological epoch is the way of the human being. Campbell expresses it this way: not the animal world, not the plant world, nor the miracle of the spheres, but man himself is now the crucial mystery. Man is that alien presence with whom the forces of egoism must come to terms, through whom the ego is to be crucified and resurrected, and in his image, society is to be reformed. This is why it's so important for us to understand that we can't keep going out to seek salvation. Salvation will come by turning within, and the modern crisis has thrown us into that very position where we have no choice but to move within and seek the God seed inside. Now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and come back to you because I have a story that needs telling. And this is part 3 of the talk. And I mentioned that I had received an extraordinary gift last week on Holy Saturday, and I need to share that with you now. Let me preface it by giving you a little quote from Carl Jung, which I love. He says, "The night, through dreams, tells the myths forgotten in the day." The night, through dreams, tells the myths forgotten in the day. And that is the perfect description of what happened last Saturday when my internet went out. And naturally I was concerned, and my son helpfully called Comcast, and they promised to send someone to fix my internet connection. So I received a knock on my door, and a young gentleman by the name of Sean came in. We said hello, polite greetings, keeping good social distancing. He worked on one side of the room where my internet modem was, and I sat on the other room with my telephone using my hotspot to grade my student papers from Indiana University. And of course, we started to chat, the technician and I. And Sean asked, "What are you doing on your computer right now through your hotspot?" I said, "I'm grading papers. I teach at a university." He said, "What do you teach?" I said, I teach philosophy." "Ah," said Sean, "I used to like philosophy very much. I used to read Nietzsche all the time. I loved Nietzsche. Those were in the days before I understood love." Well, of course, immediately my ears were flapping. This could be a very interesting conversation. So I turned my chair away from my computer to face Sean, and I said, "Wow, so from Nietzsche, I mean, it sounds like you were really excited by him. What were some of the things that were so compelling?" And so Sean shared some of the ideas of Nietzsche that he had found compelling, and then reiterated, "But that was during the time when I thought I could do without love." So I finally said, "Sean, you're really intriguing me. What was it that caused you finally to give up your fascination with Nietzsche?" And Sean said, "Well, it was a dream I had just before the new year." I said, "Sean, I am a lover of dreams. I would be so honored if you would share your dream with me." And so he did. And I'm going to read it to you because I want to really make sure that I use his words. This is the great gift from Sean, the Comcast internet technician. "I am in a big restaurant, and there's a long table on the other side of the room where people are sitting. A father and his daughter are seated there, and the father is saying to the daughter, "It's all right. You can be married to Satan and take him as your husband. That's how it must be." I am excited and concerned at hearing these words and immediately begin to rise up out of my seat into the air, and then I am flying overhead across the room towards them. I stretch out my left hand towards the young woman, and at that moment, a bright light comes out of the sky and pierces the palm of my left hand. I am filled with this incredible sense of peace and love. That is Sean's dream. Now, to me, as a lover of stories and a holder of hundreds of stories, this dream was electrifying because the dream itself is the opening paragraphs of one of the great ancient fairy tales that has come to us from the Bronze Age. It's the motif of the father who marries his daughter to the devil. Those of you who are knowledgeable about folklore will recognize this story motif. Marie-Louise von France gives a very short version of this tale in her book, Individuation Motifs. Is that right? Individual Motifs in Fairy Tales. So you could look for that book. But let me give you a slightly longer storyline. And I'm noticing that we're already at 5:30, so I'm going to contain the story within our bounds here. This is a story that comes from Latvia. And what I've done is to take versions from Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Russia, which are all those Northern European countries, to bring more of the details into the story because it's very rich. The story is called The Woodcutter and the Devil. Once upon a time, a woodcutter heard about a kingdom that had fallen into the wasteland. And so he set out at once to find it. On his way, he went through a deep wood, and he heard a loud lamentation and came upon a group of animals who were all arguing with each other over which one of them should be given the honor of singing the lament for their friend elk who had died. The woodcutter, taking pity on their bitter argument, said, "Why not allow me to sing the lament? As a human, I can imitate each of your voices and thereby honor each of you in the song for elk." This was joyous news to the animals, who agreed on the spot. And after the woodcutter had sung the lament in their voices, they each gave him the gift of shape-shifting, that he should take on their own form whenever he needed. The woodcutter continued and found himself shortly in the kingdom that had fallen into the wasteland. And when he asked, "What is the trouble here?" the people said sorrowfully, "The king has married his daughter to the devil. And since that day, nothing grows, and no rain falls, and no marriages take place, and no children have been born." "I shall bring her back," said the woodcutter. The old king agreed that if the woodcutter should take on this task and succeed, he would receive the king's daughter's hand in marriage and the kingdom. "Very good," said the woodcutter. "Take me now to the place where the princess was last seen." And the people took him to the place in the garden where she had last been seen. "And now leave me," said the woodcutter. And everyone left. No sooner were they gone than the woodcutter turned himself into a dog and began sniffing the ground till he found the foul stench of the devil. And with his dog's nose, he tracked the devil back to the devil's doorway. And there at the mouth of the great dark cave that leads down to the crystal palace of hell was the door. The woodcutter hid behind a rock and waited. And sure enough, just before daybreak, the devil came back from his night hunting and called upon the door with the magic to open it. No sooner had he done so than the woodcutter changed himself into a fly and went zooming into the cave, and the devil saw nothing. As a fly, the woodcutter flew to the very center of the labyrinth of the Crystal Palace, and there in a golden cage sat the king's daughter. The woodcutter spoke to her. He said, "I have come to rescue you." "Yes," she said, "of course. The devil is going to come down to this very room. He's going to fling open the door of the cage and command me to make him his breakfast. That is the moment that you must take your action." And so the woodcutter hid. And no sooner had the devil come down and flung open the gates where the princess was locked in, then the woodcutter changed himself into a lion, and with a great roar he leaped out and grabbed the old devil and chewed him to bits and ate him down every last bite. But then, how was the woodcutter and the princess to escape from the depths of hell? They did not know the magic words to let them out. "Don't worry," said the princess. "I know the devil's magic book." And she went to it, and she turned directly to the page that spoke about where the devil's own power was hidden. "In the deepest parts of hell, there is a tree, and on the tree there is a branch, and on the branch there is a nest, and in the nest there is an egg, and in the egg there is a diamond. And whosoever has this diamond and brings it into the land of the living shall lift the very crystal palace of hell up into the living world and all that is within it." So the woodcutter changed himself into a bird, and following the directions from the magic book, he went through the labyrinth of hell till he came to the tree, and on the tree the branch, and on the branch the nest, and in the nest the egg, and in the egg the diamond. And he plucked forth the diamond, and he flew back to the mouth of the cave. And there sat the gatekeeper of hell. And the woodcutter knew that the gatekeeper of hell hated above all else cats. So the woodcutter cunningly changed himself into a cat, swallowed the diamond, and then pranced right in front of the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper was so disgusted to see a cat that he commanded the door of hell to be opened. He took the cat and flung it into the land of the living. No sooner was the cat outside of hell than three things happened simultaneously. The great crystal palace of hell erupted from the earth and moved up into the land of the living, as tall as it had been deep. The princess stepped out of the mouth of the cave. The old king died. The woodcutter took the hand of the princess, and together they went back to the kingdom. And the waters began to flow, and the green returned to the earth, and the weddings began to happen, and many children were born to that kingdom. So here is the great story of the renewal of the wasteland. And in the dream of Sean, the internet technician, we have the self-same metaphor, the self-same image. And to read that metaphor mythologically or psychologically, to ask, what does it mean for the father to give his daughter in marriage to the devil? It seems to me that it is easy to read that as a sign of what has happened over the last 4,000 years. That essentially the patriarchy has sent the feminine down into the shadow. There is no goddess in Judaism or Christianity or Islam. There is only the God. And the lack of the feminine has gone underground, and there has consorted with the other shadow figures, But remember, this story is so precious because it says the devil's kingdom is a crystal palace and the devil's power is a diamond. The diamond is the symbol for the wholeness of the self, the multifaceted self, the self that can reflect all the sides, dark and light. And again, as our story suggests, what happens is not a destruction of evil. The devil is ingested. The devil is taken in, both the bodily form as well as the diamond self. So this is truly that beautiful image that Jung speaks about so much in his books on alchemy, the union of the opposites, the impossible but necessary task of finding how to resolve the tensions of the opposites inside of yourself. Returning to Sean's dream one last time, this is Holy Saturday, to hear a dream where the image of that moment of bliss is the penetration of the hand, the left hand, the hand of darkness, the hand of the shadow, by that spear of light from above. And that is when he is pierced and filled with this sense of incredible love. And Sean, at that moment, gives up thinking that Nietzsche is the greatest thing in the world, adopts Christianity because that's the only tradition he is aware of, and has begun to read deeply of the Christian mystics, trying to understand what happened to him in those brief 5 seconds, which seems equivalent to that which happened to Kabir in his 15 seconds, which is equally possible for each one of us when we are willing to take that journey down. So now let us conclude our journey together. I have just a couple of quotes that I wanted to share with you. The first is from the great German poet Rainer Maria Rilke, without whom no presentation of mine would be complete. Let me share this image too, because it's such a stunning image. We have the Joseph Campbell quote first. And so every one of us shares the supreme ordeal, carries the cross of the Redeemer, not in the bright moments of our tribe's great victories, but in the silences of our personal despair. And this is a lovely image onto which I photoshopped a viral mask to remind us of the times we are all in. But this is our task, to carry that weight, to carry the world and undertake the heroic journey. Here is the image that illustrates this piece of poem from Rilke. This is Jacob wrestling with the angel. Rilke says, "What we choose to fight is so tiny, when what fights with us is so great. When we fight with the small, these small things, the triumph itself makes us small. That which is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us. I mean the angel who appeared to the wrestler of the Old Testament when the wrestler's sinews grew long like metal strings. He felt them under his fingers like chords of deep music. Whoever was beaten by this angel went away proud and strengthened and great from that harsh hand that kneaded him as if to change his shape. Winning does not tempt that man, for this is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by greater and greater beings." So the challenge for us is whether we can sit in the darkness and wrestle with these greater and greater beings. T.S. Eliot reminds us that we must not hasten this moment of the wrestling in the dark. I said to my soul, "Be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. My friends, my dear, dear unseen friends, we come to the end of my presentation. This alien landscape is not an outer horizon, for the outer horizons have been taken away. The only way we can go is within. As Joseph Campbell noted in one of his last books, we must explore the inner reaches of outer space. And so here's the inner landscape. It may look bleak, it may look lonely, but if you are willing to travel to the end, you may find what it is you are seeking. I will come back from the screen sharing. Can you see me? Yeah. Okay, good. The last thing I would like to read for you is what Joseph Campbell speaks to in this difficult moment of inner dreaming. He says, "Where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a God. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourself. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be all alone, we shall be with all the world." I hope these words have brought some insight to you in this dark time, and that you are willing to take up the challenge of the call to adventure, to fall down the rabbit hole, and to seek that reconciliation of the opposites, and lead your shadow back into the marriage and to a new world that we are all helping to create and shape deep in our own struggles and darkness. So this is the end of my presentation. Oh, we did not see the last image, says Andrew. So I will share that with you. Is it being shared now, Andrew? Can you see it? And at this moment, we are going to ask you to do a couple of things. One is, if you have a question that is easily articulated, I invite you to type it into the chat. I'm going to put on my reading glasses and open the chat room on my screen so that I can see if there are some questions there that need answering. Meanwhile, Don is going to see if anyone wants to actually enter into the conversation here and come in with a live question and possibly their video as well. I think we have those options. Okay, Don, are you on? You're still muted. Did you want to explain to people again how they might go about asking a question in real time?
Yeah, before we do that, Kathy, do we want to do the book page first?
Yeah, you can. I don't have it. You have it, right?
I've got it. And Bill, you'll have to unmute yourself. It's not letting me unmute you. Where is it? Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Over to you, Bill.
can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. I just want to let everybody know we have set up a page on bookshop.org/shop/Young Atlanta where we put up some book recommendations. We've got Rebecca's listed here. And a small portion of the proceeds from these sales, if you click on the links from this site, will come back to us and also are shared with a lot of independent booksellers to help keep them in business. So although you can't go to the back of the room anymore to buy stuff from me or Deborah personally, you could go to this site and do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
So a lot of the questions that I see here in the chat room have to do with people who missed seeing some of the images. And it would be very easy for me just to save my PowerPoint. I think almost everyone has the PowerPoint app on their computer these days. It's a free Microsoft program. So I will just make the PowerPoint available as well as my reference and resource notes. Okay.
So we're going to alternate between chat questions and raise your hand questions. I'm not super familiar with raise your hand. I believe what you need to do is there's participants at the bottom. Click on that, and I think in the lower right-hand corner there should be a raise your hand flag. And did we decide, Rebecca, to allow people to unmute themselves, or?
I think so. Yeah, I see a couple of people have raised their hands down there.
So I think Dee Wagner has got the first chat question.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Dee Wagner.
Hi, Dee.
Hi, thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
I wanted to ask you if you were familiar with the work of child psychiatrist Judith Kestenberg. And if not, if I could share a little bit, because her work so resonates with everything you have said tonight.
Ah, good. A kindred spirit.
Yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
sounds like you haven't heard of her work.
No.
She and her colleagues studied developmental dances, infant dances, and they identified infant rhythms that alternate in quality between those that they call indulging and those they call fighting.
Wow.
And these wrestle inside 5 circles of support. It's how we all embody.
Yes.
And I have thought that these are the missing elements from Iron John.
Ah.
So in order to free the wild energy that we often rib cage, we often cage in the middle of our belly brains. We must steal the key from the mother. The key being, we must steal the knowing of self from her. She thought we wanted to eat that right now. But we do not want to eat that right now. This wrestling with the mother. I think this is the missing king's story from the handless maiden.
Aha. Yes.
You know, the king's story was lost. He didn't eat or drink for 7 years. And he comes home, and we don't know exactly other than that what happened. I'm thinking he went to his mother. This is the son-mother myth, the son and mother, which is the Holy Mother. This is the son and mother. And he probably said, what made you think I could have said that?
This is wonderful. You are a very wise woman, Dee.
Oh.
And if you will put in the chat the name again of that.
Judith Kestenberg work.
Yeah, I will add that to my resource list for people, because that's a wonderful thing. I did not know her work. I love that she's discovered this dancing energy in children.
Yes.
And yeah, everything you said, it's weaving together. It's all of a piece. You can feel the wholeness. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Lincoln Carr is next.
Yes, I'd like to better understand the moral will, this fourth layer in these 5 layers that you were describing. In my philosophy group, we've been talking a lot about the will and the will of the earth and the will of nature and its role in the creation of the coronavirus and how we can understand that and have a response in our individual will. And I think we've concluded that the will is still a troublesome concept in philosophy. So,
Yes.
beyond the marshmallow study, could you
Yeah.
elaborate a bit
Well,
about this?
let's look at it both from the Eastern and the Western traditions. And I'll start with the Eastern because it might be clarifying to start there with something outside of our usual experience. In the Eastern tradition, of course, is this profound recognition of the need for asceticism, for deliberately giving up things that make your life easier and more comfortable, involving giving up food, giving up water, giving up shelter, giving up clothes, adopting the status of the beggar, the mendicant wandering from town to town with nothing but a bowl, because they recognize that it's only the voluntary asceticism that tests the muscle of the moral will. And I love that, the idea that the moral will is also a muscle that needs to be exercised. Now, if we come back to the Western tradition, we're at a very dangerous place because we've worked ourselves kind of into a corner with our neuroscience ideas that maybe will does not exist, right? Willpower does not exist. Homo sapiens aren't actually capable of will. It's all predetermined based on chemical impulses, and we're really helpless in the face of this, to which I hope most of us as Jungians and thinkers would say, hogwash. The moral will is the very core and essence of anything we call culture. And it is a muscle, and you must exercise it. And everyone has experienced the distinction between the sagging feeling in the self where you simply give in to some physical or material or emotional need or longing, and the moment where something in you rises up with that other energy, right? The resistance energy, the energy of the fight, the yang energy to move towards it and say, no, this is a moment to resist. This is a moment to push back. So the moral will is an essential piece of every spiritual journey, an essential piece of every ethical journey too. So that, and sadly, of course, that piece is missing in a lot of what we're looking at because there's still a lot of behaviorism running amok in our social psychology. But I think if we looked at that original image that I shared from my Facebook post, right, of those three circles, that the growth circle certainly implies a moral awakening because it's a move away from the needs and pleasures of the self towards a deep caring, right? This is the moment in the hero journey where Parsifal or Tristan says to the Grail King, "What ails thee?" And so allows the story to continue onward. Finding that compassion is the essence there of the moral will, and then taking action because of the compassion. So thank you, Lincoln, for asking that question. Tremendously important.
Thank you for teaching us.
So Rebecca, you've got a few chat questions.
Yes. Evelyn Brewer wants to know, how does one know if they are following their God spark? That clearly is the $64,000 question. How do we know? Here is where the ability to adopt the yin position is so important. Because until you can be quiet enough to hear the still small voice, you have not got a prayer's chance of knowing what the spark is, what the little voice is that is inside of you wanting to come out. And we are so bombarded with the outer voices and the outer demands that being able to tune in and really listen to what the core of the self is yearning for becomes a very difficult thing. And my hope is that this time period may in fact be giving us a little bit of relief, right? because we're not being thrust into the outer world every hour of every day. We actually now have the ability to simply turn off the phone, turn off the computer, and we are completely then surrounded by our own silence, if we so desire. This could be the moment that more of us are getting in touch and catching a glimmer of that little spark, which is our seed, our God seed, and listening, especially listening to our dreams, trying to find what Michael Meade calls that Ariadne thread that connects you to your inner star or your inner core. This is so essential. You cannot find it. No one else can tell you. No one else can tell you what your spark is. But you will recognize it with that same kind of instantaneous aha as a love at first sight. Because it is your soul. Of course you will fall in love with it at first sight, and you'll know that's what it is. Or if it's buried very, very deeply, you may, like Jung, simply be drawn to something strange and inexplicable, like the need to play with small stones. And as a grown man, his willingness to leave the house and go sit at the edge of the lake and, like a child in the sand, play with small stones. Marie-Louise von Franz talks about the hours that she spent silently sitting as witness just to accompany him while he sat to play with stones, because he knew something sacred was moving. He didn't know where it was going to go. And eventually it led to him building his tower, right? He built the tower, and it was inside of that tower that he wrote the Red Book, wrote the Answer to Job, all of his great works. This was the tower that was waiting to come forth out of him. So take this opportunity, drastic and horrible as it seems, to be still and quiet enough to hear your own little voice and feel the warmth of your own little spark. Okay?
Okay, we have a raised hand from Aaron King.
Hi, Rebecca. It's so nice to meet you.
Aaron, I'm so glad you got through. Lovely. Aaron and I have been email pen pals for months.
Great to finally meet you. So
And
my
you.
question is about rites of passage and ritual, and how one of the criticisms of North Americans, because we lack those things in a pretty big way, that it impacts our ability to have an orientation of perceiving the world. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on that, especially from a mythological lens.
Well, Joseph Campbell, of course, was of the mind that ritual is so essential that we can blame most of our social ills on the lack of it. We do not have the necessary rituals for welcoming the young people into adulthood. And so we have a lot of delinquency, depression, suicide. We do not have the rituals for welcoming the warriors back from the war. And so we have horrendous numbers of soldiers unable to integrate. We do not have the proper ritual for bringing people into and out of marriage, so that most people have no idea that marriage itself is a hero journey and it's going to require sacrifice and suffering. And so we are helpless and adrift in that abyss. Very significantly, we have no rituals of croning or crowning our elders. And so we can actually live in a time where people can say, well, maybe the coronavirus is meant to just kill them all off because, we got way too many old people anyhow. This is unthinkable in ancient societies. That this could even be spoken out loud would have been unthinkable. But because we have no rituals of elderhood, we do not recognize that our elders are holding the stories and the experiences and the dreams for all of us, for our tribe. We don't go to them to get that wisdom. And so we abandon them and they become voiceless and soundless and disposable. So yes, we need rituals at every facet of life. This is one of the 4 fundamental functions of mythology that Joseph Campbell was so passionate about. I think he snuck it into every single lecture that he ever gave. The 4 functions of myth. The cosmological, you must have a cosmology that's believable, or people will understand that the rest of your religion is bunk. We have got to have a living cosmology and be with it and current. We must have a social function of myth, and this is the function you're speaking to. Rituals are the social function. They move you from one passage to the next with grace so that you can see where things are. They relegate our relationship one to another. The psychological function of myth is the deep one that we've spent most of our time today talking about. The mythic stories are like the collective dreams that are the guideposts to what you're supposed to be doing with your inner life. The fact that we kept projecting all of this growth out there as something beyond us is really tragic, because it means we don't have a living psychology that is deep enough that we understand that it's a gift to go to sleep and dream. It's a gift to write our dreams and have time to spend doing active imagination with our dreams. It's a gift to give each other our dreams and spend time thinking about them. All of that belongs to personal psychology. And finally, we do not have the function that I consider the most important, which is the mystical or the metaphysical. It is what sparks joy, to borrow a phrase from Marie Kondo, but at a much deeper level, what allows you to get out of bed in the morning with that sense of joy and expectancy. If you don't have some belief that this life is worth living, that there is grandeur to it, that somewhere there is a story that explodes with meaning and possibility and a numinosity, and you belong to it, right? That's the bliss. That last function is where you touch your bliss. So we have to think in this time of coronavirus of how we're going to reactivate those 4 functions, because we currently do not have any active religions except those of the mystical traditions, right? The mystics of any tradition are able to handle this. But we don't seem to have a functioning social mythology that allows all of us to ride this out with any kind of depth or decency. So we have much to do. But the good news, the really good news is we know how to do the rituals. We've got that. We still have those sacred technologies from the elders. They're inside the stories. We know what to do. And if you've ever been to a Joseph Campbell week at Esalen, for instance, or one of these other marvelous retreats that, Robert Bly, James Hillman, David White, some of these wonderful adventurers can take people on. I do this, right? You take people on the adventure, you do the rituals, you teach them the sacred technology, and that's how you introduce it back into society, one person at a time. I'll come and do it for you, Erin.
Thank you. I hope you do.
It's a promise. Thank you.
This goes back to chat.
Okay, let's see. This is interesting. Someone by the name of Michael is talking about a very extraordinary moment he had. He calls it an extended moment where he felt simultaneously the greatest exaltation and the deepest despair. He says the overall effect was positive. I did not want it to end. Here's what I'm sensing, and I could be wrong because this is just an interpretation of someone else's mystical experience. But very often what's happening at the moment of breakthrough, what's being broken is the ego, right? So like in the story, the moment that the cat is kicked out of hell, 3 things happen simultaneously. One of them was the death of the king. The king is the ego or the superego. It has to die in order for the new paradigm to emerge and take its rightful place. The old must die. So the pain or the despair is the ego's despair. It's the last gasp. It is letting go. It is being ripped off. It is the shell seed which must be destroyed in order that the new life can come forth. So it's very possible to experience that exaltation and despair at the self same moment. Now, there are other ways to interpret that, and poets do a good job of it, but I'm giving you just one possibility for how those two apparently contradictory emotions could coexist at once in a perfectly normal, rational way, speaking mythologically. So Michael says he's going to send me another email, and so we'll continue our conversation later. Okay, Michael? Thank you. It's a good question. Thank you.
Okay, some of these chats are coming to me directly rather than you. Deb Herberger says, could you please repeat the quote about hope ending with, "You are not ready for the light"?
I think that was probably the T.S. Eliot poem, and that will be in the notes, right? The T.S. Eliot, where you have to wait without thought, you are not ready for thought, the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. That's T.S. Eliot from 4 quartets, and it will be in my notes.
And Karen R. says, hi, Rebecca, could you talk more about the coming of the feminine as a power and evolution?
That's a talk in and of itself. We should, I mean, I could go on for hours and hours. I've only briefly suggested that the return of the feminine is one of the keys, if not the central key, and I'm not alone in this. You Jungians here on the call tonight will remember that Carl Jung declared that the elevating of the Virgin Mary in her status within the Catholic Church was the single most important thing that had happened in religion in that century, right? The elevation of the feminine is key to everything, but we're not talking about the political elevation of women. We're talking about the elevation of the yin, the elevation of those feminine attributes or qualities that have been pressed into the shadow by the very yang-oriented patriarchal culture, and teasing apart the personal and the political from the mythological and epochal is very delicate and difficult work, because of course each of us in our personhood carries a piece of the political and the mythic. So it really is a bigger conversation and deserves a much more nuanced approach, and one that I would be happy to give. So have her get in touch with me.
Okay, Gail Thomas has raised her hand.
Hello, Gail.
Hi, give me just a minute, get my mic going.
Ah, there you are, I see you.
Yeah, I love your enthusiasm, and I wonder if you could give me some thoughts on a couple of experiences I've had with my dreams. I'm just in my 4th year of completing certification in depth psychology through the Depth Psychology Alliance program. And during this process, I've had 2 dreams for the collective. And several people have confirmed that they are for the collective, and I just wonder about your thoughts since you were talking about the mystic and
Yes.
what you would say about
Well,
that.
I think it's very clear that some of us dream dreams for the collective. So it is not at all an unlikely thing that you would be dreaming dreams for the collective, given the work that you're doing and the challenge that you have undertaken. Sean's dream that I shared with you was definitely for Sean. I mean, that was his transformative moment. But it also felt like a dream for the collective because there were so many interpenetrating links. When I lived in Evanston for many years, the Evanston Jung Center was right across the alley from my house. I could just walk across the alley and go to the Jung Center. And it was during the times, this would have been the early 80s, a magnificent Jungian analyst by the name of Arvind Vasavada was in residence. And he started a dream group at the Jung Institute. Every Tuesday evening, we'd sit around and one person would share a dream. And then Arwen would thank them and say, now the dream comes to the center of our circle. Now it belongs to all of us. And we would quietly meditate on the dream. And then anyone who felt moved would say, if this were my dream, here is what spoke to me. And in this way, we would amplify the dream going around the whole circle so that each person would speak to that part or image of the dream that had the most resonance. And every dream, Gail, every dream turned out to be collective. Everyone had resonance with everyone else's dream. It was the most satisfying, reassuring thing that all of us are dreaming for each other all the time. Now, some dreams are big dreams, right? Jung's Red Book, that is a huge dream. That's a shaman dream. And what he gave us in the red dream should last generations. The Great Dream of Black Elk is one that I repeatedly read because, again, that feels like a big dream for generations of people living on this earth right here, these woods, these hills that he trod. So your dream may be an important piece of the big picture. And if you feel it is, I hope you will find ways to move it out so that other people can experience it as soul food, because that's what it is. It's soul
And do you have
food.
suggestions on ways? I mean, I got a song. I have songs come through my dreams also. And so I put the
Wow,
song.
lucky you.
Yeah, sometimes.
Can you sing us a little piece of the dream song?
Yeah,
Would that be,
I'd love to.
could I ask for that?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. As the moon and stars spark with fires of ancient human, flesh of earth and ash walk in ways of ancient humans, hair of air and stone hold the wave of ancient humans, quiet minds listening, hear the joy of ancient humans.
Oh, Gail, that was magnificent.
No, thank you.
Oh my goodness, that is so perfect. The joy of ancient humans. It feels like a full circle, doesn't it? Because I opened this circle talking about the importance of honoring the ancestors, lifting up the ways of the ancient humans. And Gail, the other wise woman, right now has given us this beautiful dream song. That's exquisite. I hope that you'll send me your email so that we can talk further, because I would love to learn your song and help share it. I really, really would.
I would
because
love
it sounds like a good song for a chant. It has, you know, the 4 lines and the repeating last words, and yeah, it's magnificent. So Aaron King, we'll use this song to open the ritual that we do with your new roundtable group. That way we're all feeding the collective pot right now. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate. Yeah, that was beautiful, magnificent.
So I have a couple of people with raised hands, or if you want to go to your chat.
No, who else has their hand raised?
Judith Eckert.
Hi, Judith. She's muted right now. I can see she's muted. Can you unmute her? Judith, can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Thank you.
Hi.
Well, your energy and vibrations come through. I've gotten goosebumps.
Good.
You know what that means, I'm sure.
I do. I do.
When I hear something spiritual, I just cannot help it. It just appear, and you can't fake goosebumps.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I'm going to leave the ancestors and go to something Campbell once said at the end of one of his lectures. He was thinking about the computer, little angels on the keys, and that it was an Old Testament God.
Yes.
In the computer,
yes,
there were rules.
That's right.
But now I am thinking in digital terms. I'm 80 years old, and so the digital world is fairly new to me, but I know sometimes there's too much in the computer and you have to reboot. So I'm thinking this is a time of rebooting as well. Stopping, clearing, defragging, whatever has to happen before we can start again.
Yes.
We have to reboot and clean it up. And that's another metaphor.
It's a wonderful metaphor, and I'm so glad you introduced the word defragging. I think that should enter the mythological lexicon as of right now. What this coronavirus is about is defragging, mythological defragging. We all need to clear out and make space, because that's essentially what defragging is doing in your computer, right? It's taking the memory and removing all of the extra duplications of things and pressing it down so that you've got more space, more memory space. So essentially that's what we're needing. We need more space in our memories for things that matter right now. So yes, we'll take that metaphor, and I thank you 1,000 times for it. And we got that from an 80-year-old. Defragging.
Yes. I'll be defragging for the rest of my existence. So I can leave a clearer energy for my children and grandchildren.
So Joseph Campbell's wonderful work with his computer, and of course he was working with one of the very, very early ones. It did not have a user-friendly interface like Apple. He used to complain bitterly that his computer was like Yahweh, a God of many rules and very little mercy. Capable of obliterating a day's worth of work at a single stroke.
The other thing I wanted to ask is the wisdom of the poets, because Eliot talked about the wasteland.
Yes.
And will we go with a bang? We will not leave with a bang, but a whimper. And that is heavy. I mean, that is so powerful.
It is. T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and well, of course, the four quartets that I quoted from, there's also a marvelous play that T.S. Eliot wrote. Later in his life, he was very religious. He worked with a big cathedral, a church, and he wrote a play for them.
Oh, yeah?
And there's a marvelous sort of litany that the chorus repeats. And one of the lines in there, he said, "What life have we if not life lived in community? And what community is there not lived in the sacred? And it is always the building and the destroying and the rebuilding of the temple."
Wow.
Yes. And then this sort of very chilling thing, he says, "What will you do when he comes from the desert and asks you, do you love your neighbor? Can you answer truly, yes? Or do you say, I use my neighbor for my buying and selling, for my getting and spending, and the stranger will turn and leave?
Oh, my God.
Oh, my soul, be prepared for the coming of that stranger."
Thank you.
So I think that, again, that we are in that time. The stranger has appeared in our midst and is asking that question of us. If we are not willing to destroy and rebuild our temple, the stranger may leave again and we will be lost. We will be in the wasteland.
And I'm also seeing the image of Notre Dame, the spire burning. Oh, was that an image?
That's very interesting, that mythologically, yes, 100 years from now when the story is told, that will be the first chapter. Mm-hmm. The spires were burning. And we'll see how all of these things now become these footnotes, these anchors, these stepping stones towards the great shutdown. I like that. That seems very alive. That gave me the goosebumps.
Okay, we have Shauna Robbins, hand raised.
All right. Thank you so much, Judith.
Thank you.
So, Shauna.
Hi.
Do we have Shauna
Hi.
on screen?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. There you are. Hello.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for your offerings and for your wonderful energy in your stories. And my question is, where in your account is the return to Earth and interdependence? Can you make that a little more explicit? The living
I saw
land.
that question in the chat room, so I'm glad you got through with a hand raised.
Thank you.
The return to Earth in terms of ourselves. Is that what the question you're asking?
Yes, our interdependence with the living land and all the critters and our habitat. You talk a lot about going inward and finding the self, and I was wondering.
Well, here's the story that springs to mind, and I'm sorry if I always answer in stories or poems, but that's how my mind works.
Oh, it's great.
My husband has a joke. He says, "How can you tell when Rebecca is speaking in metaphor? Her mouth is moving." So here's my response. My response is to give you the image of a wonderful ancient tale from the Pima Indians of the American Southwest. This is one of their story sagas about elder brother, who is their hero, who goes on many adventures to try to save his people from various dangers. And one of the tales is it's very interesting. It's almost a duplication of Jack and the Beanstalk. He goes off, elder brother goes off to confront this evil giant or ogre that's been harassing the people. And after a series of encounters, he has overcome that particular ogre, but the ogre says, "You may think that you have destroyed me, but I tell you this, that I have sons, and my sons have sons. And unless your people change their ways, the destruction will come unto every generation." And so there's a final scene of elder brother coming back through the great channels of the ridges and the mountains and standing at the top of a ridge, looking down towards his village and thinking about the truly heroic journey that is now to begin, where he must go back and try to tell his people that they must change their ways. And if any of you are familiar with the Pima, the very famous Pima symbol, I think it's actually on like the flag of New Mexico. Or is that? No, that's a different one. It's the labyrinth with the little man. It's called Man in the Maze. It's a very famous symbol you'll see down there. And this represents elder brother standing at the top of that peak, waiting to come back into the village. And so the implication is that's the really hard part, is coming back with the boon or the insight, your aha moment from your own private heroic journey. How do you bring that back and share it? Because we all know a mystical experience is ineffable by definition, and trying to share it with others is so frustrating, right? Every great hero, from Jesus Christ to Jung to Joseph Campbell, has lamented, nobody gets it. Nobody understands what I was really trying to do. They've turned me into a god. It's totally missing the point, right? So the truth is that we're in for a tough time, because there are those who are already saying this is an opportunity for us to defrag our society, to defrag ourselves, to get wiser. But we can't, and here's the phrase, we can't just get back to normal. Getting back to normal is simply to invite the ogre's son to come 10 years down the road, and the ogre's grandson to come 10 years down the road. If we can't actually shift and change and transform, we're simply perpetuating the old paradigm and the old myth. We have not actually regenerated the wasteland. So the real adventure is yet to come, isn't it? There are multiple stages. And as you remember, when Joseph Campbell did his big image, the hero cycle, with the line drawn across, here's the ordeal and the trials down here, but the crossing of the threshold is pivotal, and there's as much space on the return to community up here as there is down here in that trial and ordeal period. So yeah, it's not easy. How do you teach others to move through those sheaths, digging towards a deeper understanding of our belongingness to one another? How do you move people out of the gross body, right, of just being concerned about their own little cadre of people, their own food and drink and shelter, and embracing a bigger and more urgent problem at a cost to themselves, because this will be sacrifice. All of us will have to sacrifice. Yeah. Excellent question. Thank you so much, Shauna. Thank you.
Blessings.
Okay, so no raised hands right now, so back to chat.
Okay. Well, it is 6:30. We've kept people for 2 hours. I'm not sure how long people want to stay. We still have over 100 people online, so I would be happy to take another question if anybody has one that they would like to share. I think a lot of the ones in the chat are also people who who managed to get on and raise their hands.
Yeah, let me just scroll through the videos to see if anybody's raising their physical hand. If you want to do that, if you can't figure out how to raise the hand on Zoom.
I don't know how do you raise your hand? I don't know.
Aha, I see somebody. Somebody's been activated. Hello, sir. Larry.
The picture.
Yes.
Larry Kinney, my
Wow,
old friend
okay.
Larry Kinney.
This is how you raise your hand.
You guys, how great
I thought
to
you did it
see
in the
you.
old-fashioned way, like raise it.
Hi, Larry.
What a joy to see you.
What a joy to see you too, wise old man.
Well, you're the wise old woman, and you're not so old.
Getting there, getting there.
It's such a joy to see you and to hear you do your thing. And I think sugar water is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Thank you.
Seeing your locks quite like that. You might as well build on your strengths.
There you go.
Very
You got it
enchanted.
planted.
It is nice to see life as a metaphor and to be able to tell the right story and to somehow draw inferences that will be hopefully useful in coping. There's a little touch in me that did physics as well as philosophy, as perhaps you recall. And I really do think that the COVID virus has some other stories to tell us about the depravities in the White House and all the obvious, but about the importance of understanding and how to measure and how to make sense of what we measure. And there are lots of ways to do this, and the brighter of the bunch that are perhaps more intent on income after taxes than they are saving the world are nonetheless have a chance of having something that will allow us to measure whether or not we happen to have the virus, which is really, really an insidious thing. It's different from many of the others, because when we do manage to get this thing, lots of times we don't know it, but we can nonetheless instantaneously share with others.
Right.
That's an insidious kind of thing. It doesn't give us a warning. We don't know whether we're part of the problem or part of the solution, most likely the problem.
Yes.
If we had the capability of knowing whether or not we have something that we do not want to share with our neighbors or should not want to share with our neighbors, then we stand a chance of being able to have the kind of togetherness we all like, but without the risk of this evil disease. That's the one thing that sort of intrigues me, just from the technical side of the equation, but also because it has, I think, real metaphorical value. How do we examine our own souls? The unexamined life is not worth living, as our old pal Socrates observed a while back.
Right. Well, Larry, let's take that very word measure and try to think about it, as you suggest, metaphorically or mythologically, because I think a lot of the people on this call, people who are interested in Jung or Joseph Campbell, tend to be the left-brained types, right? We are into the intuition a lot of the time. We like the magical and the mystical, not so much the measuring. But the measuring has a deep place in mythology. It is presumably that which called us into carnation, that which sort of danced in front of our souls and made our souls yearn to incarnate into physical form, where we could measure ourselves, test our mettle against the universe of the 10,000 things, right? The 10,000 things are those which can be measured. That's the very definition of the 10,000 things. So in a sense, here's where I'm going with this, that COVID-19 and the necessary science that we're going to have to learn to keep ourselves safe is actually a uniting of the opposites. And now I'm talking about opposites in terms of temperament or typology, the different types of thinking, those who prefer the whimsical dance and those who love the sacred geometry. This is an opportunity for the uniting of those opposites. And believe me, in a lot of us, they feel opposite. You are one of the rare geniuses in whom they have been dancing for decades and doing a lot more than just dancing. We're talking about
my favorite
Shiva
partner right
Shakti
here.
stuff. Right. The Shiva Shakti going on in your brain is something to behold. For a lot of us, though, typologically, this is a challenge. And I know that I have been actually spending time on YouTube watching amazing mathematical geniuses try to explain by the use of little dots that touch each other and change colors what these systematic approaches are actually doing for us. And I'm amazed at the beauty, the rigor, the glory of these formulas that they're able to evolve and
Good for
apply.
you.
It's like, wow, that's just amazing.
Of course.
So, yeah, I think that this is all in our futures, the need to dance more with numbers and the world of measurement.
There's a reason that a lot of excellent physicists play the violin. And here's
yes, it does go together, doesn't it? It really does. And I shouldn't be so downspoken. Had I my life to live earlier again, I would do more math at the front end of my academic career. That is for sure.
once it gets in your blood system, it'll stay.
I think so.
You know, Rebecca, what it makes me think of is the other party here is the network, sacred network, the dots of light that connect.
Yes.
And Hansel and Gretel's pathway
Oh.
being laid down.
Oh.
Turn and measure or find our way home if the wild side has destroyed it. All sorts of images like that come to my mind. So there's a lot here.
That is a wonderful image. So let us pray that we have enough of the Hansel methodical energy in us that we remember to drop the crumbs behind us.
Indeed.
But in a sense, that's what we're doing here, is it not? The sharing of the stories, the sharing of the dreams. We're trying to leave some kind of a path or a trail of how we humans at this critical juncture tried to handle the onslaught of this great dark God that came upon us. And hopefully, our children and grandchildren will tell their children and grandchildren how we were the generation that didn't lose the thread, that didn't let go of the thread in the labyrinth, that held on, that made it to the center and met the monster and realized it was ourself. That's what we need to do. That's the task, right? Let us be the generation that does that.
Wonderful. Well,
Hallelujah. Good to see you. Thank you
it's
so
wonderful
much.
to see you. And I wondered what happened to the lion, you know, after he sort of took in the devil and ran it through his entire system, and what came out and but
He became a bird.
compost.
Right after the lion, he transformed into a bird, which I think is lovely. He goes from that huge devouring animal, king of the forest, into this symbolic spirit of the self.
Yes, but in the transition, immediately before the transition, what did the lion do?
You think there's a dump
Allowed the
somewhere.
devil to pass through his alimentary canal.
Right,
And
Larry?
Came
Larry?
compost for new life.
In the Crystal Palace is a large pile of shit that's got your name on it, because you're the one who spotted it.
Indeed. 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 We have to embrace it. I think I now
right.
understand the grand metaphor of your entire lecture.
Embrace your shit. That's
And
all,
ain't
folks.
all fun and games.
Yes, exactly. That's the essence, right?
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Pleasure.
Well
Pleasure.
done. Really great.